Today, what I wanted to share with you in this session is, first of all, I'm quite sorry, so I couldn't be present there with you. I couldn't stay with you the whole day. I'm missing the kind of discussion that is going on, you know. I foresaw it. However, I had other commitments overseas, and I couldn't be back in Singapore for today's session. So sorry for the inconvenience. However, I'm very happy to be here, at least online, and to share some considerations about the power of mapping. Let's start from a very definition of mapping. Mapping is a manipulatory tool. It's something that the very skilled people and now also algorithms use to manipulate data. So to show different kind of scenarios and interpret data in ways that the human mind is not really ready to receive, because the human mind perceives the visual representation of data and information in mapping as a matter of truth, as it was certainly during the medieval times. Today, I don't think things changed much. You know, when we see the representation of data, we think that this is data. And we don't think that this is an interpretation of data. So that's the power of mapping. It helps us to understand and to interpret data, large amount of data or small amount of data, and to convey a meaning to the audience, to communicate something. So it is a communication tool, essentially. This is what we know about maps. We have several concepts about maps that I will show you during this presentation. And the interpretations, you know, from, I gave this large span, you know, from Leonardo Da Vinci to the Singularity, without focusing on either of them, but to give you a time period during which mapping has been investigated and used by human beings, individuals and institutions to communicate and to convey data. So the power of mapping is something which is on the table, and it's here to stay with or without AI. So but from where does it come from? I started with this large diagram, you know, because we are in the LaSalle College, we are in the University of the Arts, and I thought I had to give some explanation and justification from where my considerations come from. Of course, it comes from the ambiguity between techne and ars. Techne and ars are the two words used in Greek and in Latin to identify the same thing. However, in English, the root techne has been used for technology. And sometimes we link technology to the mechanical arts, as it was during the Middle Ages, but we miss completely the technical word, which is what during the medieval times and in Greek times was considered the Banosic arts. And within the Banosic arts is most of the work that I'm doing. So it's technical work, is what it was the opposite of the liberal arts, devoted to intellectual skills and professional skills. It was detached from the mechanical arts that were the, such as agriculture, trade, or architecture, medicine, navigation, cooking. So the very noble technologies and mechanical arts. So the Banosic arts were the artisans, and not only pottery making, stone masons, carpenters, shoemakers, painters, sculptors, musicians, singers, dancers, actors, but also prostitutes and all persons engaged in retail activities. These were the Banosic arts, something quite low in society. However, the interesting thing is that when the Renaissance revamped the concept and the value of the arts, and especially the fine arts and also the performing arts, they tapped on the Banosic arts. They tapped on the artisans. They were the future artists. So here is the field in which I'm working on. I'm not working in the liberal arts, I'm not working in the mechanical arts, but in this big pot of from classical antiquity to modernity, I perceive my work in the Banosic arts. So having said that, you can refer to this literature for what I'm saying. It has been widely studied, this phenomenon, even if it has not been really received in curricula in universities today. So the liberal arts curriculum was already outlined by Plato in the Republic, so it's nothing new. However, what interests us is that Leibniz picked up this concept of Banosic arts and mechanical arts to build up modern science. So a few examples of people that worked as practitioners. We have Bisticci, let's say a manuscript maker, bookseller, very important person during the Renaissance who gave up. And this is the little story of Vespasiano da Bisticci. He was the most famous European dealer in manuscripts. He served popes, kings, and the Medici family. He's the one who started the Laurentiana Library for the Medici family. And in about 2 years, he was able to deliver a little less than 200 manuscripts to them. In 1480, at the early advent of print, he gave up. He gave up because he thought maybe he was enough rich, to give up. He thought that something new, a new technology was coming up, the world was changing, and he didn't have anything that he wanted to deal with in the new world. He didn't want to get into print. Another guy in the center is Boyle. Boyle did quite the opposite. He was thinking about a new science, how to move alchemy into the newly created science chemistry, what he created. And he thought that he needed to build up new instruments based on existing technology. And I think this is a key figure in what we are thinking nowadays in shifting mapping into the digital. And the other figure on the right is a very famous illustration of the giant Orion and Sidalion. I think you all know, the myth of Orion and Sidalion, but at least it's very well known to OpenAI nowadays because they are naming the new version of ChatGPT Orion. It is the coming one. And Orion as a name for something is a big disclaimer because all the responsibility is on Sidalion, on the one who is giving the way, who is telling to the giant what to do. So the giant, as you can read on the shirt of that illuminated manuscript, is all knowledge we have aggregating into one single repository. It is the myth of classical antiquity. It is what Newton sort of been stealing, from this classical antiquity repository when he was talking about standing on the shoulders of the giants. So Sidalion is standing on the shoulders of a blind giant. And this is the disclaimer that OpenAI is giving to all of us. The giant is blind. It's up to you what you can do with that giant, and it's your full responsibility. So getting into this field, so Vespasiano da Bisticci, I prepared the slides because if you want to keep them so you have the information, but I'm not getting too much into that. This is the story of that, but I wanted to stick on this image. The very first books were pretty much like manuscripts. We didn't see the difference, the transition was very small. And that's what's happening nowadays in the transition between bookish knowledge, the book as a medium, and something that is here to come, but not here yet, and is coming up, and it will be different from the book. So this is the image of the standing on the shoulders of the giants, is how to pick up knowledge. And this, I think, is the demonstration that we need mapping. Too much knowledge, too many books, too much information, too many things possibly useful to manage anything we want to think about. So how do we pick up the book that we need when we need it? We usually don't know, and we do it sort of random. However, Boyle thought that it was time to move from alchemy, from this random kind of search, into something more consistent and more robust. And he thought that he needed to build up a new science, and it was the chemical physical. So the instruments were the very important part in building up a new science. So we have all the tools now. The real instrument that we don't have, the new one that we need, is how to represent data in the digital space, how to make them become useful and ready to use for the human being. And this is what Boyle did, and I think it's a big inspiration for what we should do. We should put our hands on, like the Banosic arts people in the sordid arts. We should put our hands into that field and start to build up the new instruments that we need instead of waiting for companies to deliver what they will not deliver for us. So here is the summary of the advancement of learning in modernity, and that is being marked by these two factors, instrument and other conditions. We are in that kind of threshold now, and our understanding of data and narratives has been clearly explained by computer scientists recently. And I think things didn't change much in the last 10 years, even if OpenAI is claiming a kind of magic leap. But consistently, we might think that we are still in a bag of words. You know, what NLP processing and big tools like OpenAI can deliver us are still in managing and understanding words and not concepts and narratives, even if there is something like that around. So the question is, what's next? And what's next usually comes from a trajectory. As you can see here in these four images, you know, it's transportation by sea, transportation by land, news, consuming, I would say, or and on the other side is studying. So when we think at what's next, we need the trajectory. So that's why I wanted to focus, you know, on this talk, you know, in the next five minutes, on visualizing data to understand past and present situations, inspire solutions, and empower foresights for present and future challenges. I think this is what Professor Grincheva is doing excellently in her project. So, but as promised, I wanted to start from this guy from Da Vinci, who used drawing as a mapping tool, as a knowledge aggregator, and as a visual reasoning process. Drawing was something used to reason, to think about things, and to acquire new knowledge. Somehow, it has not been fully grasped or understood by scholarship in the field, because maybe scholars sometimes are not familiar with the Banosic arts and with the arts in general. You know, they just study the manuscript and they don't think about what those people were really trying to do. So I brought two examples here. Is Da Vinci working on vision, on human vision, and here is Da Vinci working on the origin of life. So we can stick on this second one. What was he doing? He was listening at people talking about what medicine and other mechanical arts knew about the origin of life. What did it mean, the origin of life? How did it work? And it was related by medicine to the sexual intercourse. So this is what he was studying here into this drawing. And scholarship analyzing this drawing was reading the text, which is on the left, as a caption to understand the drawing on the right, which is wrong, because Da Vinci was listening at people reading books or talking about topics, and he was aggregating all what he was listening into one single drawing, which is a counterfactual knowledge aggregator. It's putting together black and white, yes and no. Everything that came out from existing knowledge is put in one single drawing, which is the mapping of the existing knowledge at his time about the origin of life according to medicine. And if you read the caption on the left, it seems that it's sort of confusing, it's sort of unrelated. Yes, because it is not a caption, it is the agenda. After having aggregated the existing knowledge visually and into a mapping system, he wrote on the left what he had to do in order to move forward in that discipline. So this is the kind of power of mapping when it deals with knowledge aggregation. Something that came out more recently is the use of mapping in charting several things, charting history, charting trade balance in time series, and here, so quite interesting. I wanted to stick to this one. So this is the very origin of the pie chart. Is William Playfair's pie chart of the Turkish Empire, published in 1801. Maybe British people can understand it better, Other people sometimes don't get this point. What Playfair was telling to the people visually is that the Turkish Empire is mostly an Asiatic empire, because it's 790,000 square miles is in Asia, a little bit in Africa, and something else in Europe. So what he was pretty much sure to say with this pie chart is that the Turkish Empire is not European. However, isn't it a very, very, very interesting manipulation of data and information? Because you are picking up something which is the geographical extension of a state, of an empire, and you are inferring that this geography is a matter of identity. And you are showing it to the people to demonstrate something. So I think this is quite an interesting point to understand the power of mapping. History, a chronography of America, and you see that everything starts from something, It is I think it's substantialist prejudice, that when you know the roots of something, you know where things are going as well. So another interesting thing, which is more scientific, is how John Snows used mapping and visualization in 1854 to understand the outbreak of plague in London. This is something a bit more interesting, because in mapping the outbreak of mapes in different places of the city, he was able to link the outbreak to fresh water, to the wells where people were getting water. So other examples that you can find is the Nightingale polar area diagram that is demonstrating the causes of mortality in the army in the East. Is something that is sending to the Queen and is telling, listen, people dying in the battlefield are far less than the people dying in our hospitals. So if we want to lower the impact of war, of the Crimean War in our society, we need to work in hospitals and not in the battlefield. So this is maybe the most famous miner's flow map of Napoleon's Russian campaign. Napoleon getting to Russia with a huge army, feeling quite comfortable, and you see the black line, what was coming back from that big event. So this is quite the most famous kind of miner map. However, again, this is a data manipulation, because the Russian campaign 1812-1813 cannot be summarized in this kind of visualization only. So, and other examples is the original one, of this lesson. Usually you find this one on the web, but this is the original one. So other examples, miners get into something more sophisticated. We are using miner flow maps quite extensively. And to conclude this thing is how mapping, this mapping chart has been used by the Obama government to show to the people that they put a lot of money in the budget, in the US budget, in Medicare and in Social Security. However, this is not telling everything about that story, as you might know. So other examples are here, and if you want to have a look into the shift of from the analog, let's say, into the digital, Hans Rosling is quite an interesting pioneer. You have videos on YouTube, but it comes from the BBC. We might be able to see it. If I show the guy, I think you get him. He's the one who started to think about how to visualize information into having an impact on the audience. But again, this is data manipulation. It's not telling everything about those data. It's telling something about those data. And you feel like it is everything. So let's move. This is the summary of what we are doing. And I think I need to conclude because I went over my time. And I conclude on these slides, on the believer and the skeptical, on the power of maps. Thank you, guys, and thank you for your patience. I keep it at a bit longer than expected, but
thank you, Chris. Thank you, Professor Nanetti. There are many main takeaways, and personally, I'm thinking the power of visualization actually enhance our knowledge and then new findings, and also our all the research work. Definitely, I personally experience the collaboration with Professor Grincheva. So is there any question to Professor Nanetti? Open to floor. If it's the case, then can I ask one question? Then, yeah, Professor, it's really interesting. But oftentimes I feel like because I'm taking more qualitative approach when it comes to this Hallyu project, and then my focus area is anti-Hallyu. So my study is pretty much descriptive. Sometimes it's not easy to quantify. So I have many deep conversation, and sometimes argument with Natalia about missing some, very important aspect of such a phenomenon. So visualization it looks good and makes us understand very fast and easier, but somehow at the same time, the visualization there are many missing informations. So do you have any suggestion from your point of view, to make up our mapping project even much successful?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. I think you are touching the real core business in this kind of thing, And as Umberto Eco was mentioning quite often in his classes on the information and communication, culture is selection. Mm-hmm. That's it. culture is selection. You can put something in latency in the digital space. You don't delete it. You put things in latency. But again, if you want to say something, you need to select. It means that you need to discard something else. So we have this myth that in the digital age, we can keep everything, we can show everything, we can discuss everything, but that's not true. Because when you want to present something, when you want to share something, when you want to tell something, you need to select.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's quite.
And selection is interpretation, or if you want to be skeptical, is manipulation.
It makes perfect sense. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Oh, thank you for such an insightful keynote. As someone who encourages my graduate students to visualize, map, and model their data as systematically as possible, I found your talk both not only informative but also very encouraging too. And however, I've recently realized the tension in this approach as we lean more heavily on systematic reasoning and structured mapping. We might inadvertently lose the beauty of the accidental discoveries that randomness can bring. So, for example, I've started visiting the physical library again these days because the chance encounter with an unexpected book has sparked creative ideas in a way a structured search might not. So, in light of this, how can we incorporate a sense of serendipity and openness to the unexpected within our mapping process, ensuring that we don't completely sacrifice a rich benefits of the random and unplanned in our pursuit of systematic clarity? So.
Yes, so that's a great comment and question. Please allow me to rephrase, because the serendipity that we have in libraries, in Open Shelf Library, are based on the Dewey system. It means that we go there searching for a book, and we find a few other books related to that topic, usually written and published in English, in the English-speaking world. So that kind of serendipity is very limited, is manipulative, and is something that we shouldn't really trust. We find a few other books, but it's not really anything new. It's not a discovery, it's something that is already there. Maybe it is a discovery because we are getting there, searching for one book, and we find a few others. However, the real serendipity can happen if you start to apply in the digital space what Da Vinci did on paper. It means if you start to acquire and aggregate knowledge from very different fields, and when I say fields, I don't mean only disciplinary fields, but I mean languages, cultures, and different social spaces in which you find information and the understanding of human life. If you are able to aggregate it into a counterfactual digital visualization tool, you will get a new kind of serendipity. I wouldn't miss much the serendipity into a library. I would work on how to enhance and empower serendipity into the digital space.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Right. So we really want to have you more, but a little bit lagging behind our schedule. So thank you so much, Professor Nanetti. And then actually,
thank you, Natalia. Thank you so much for having
Natalia is over there.
Yeah, just my personal thank you very much for putting this conversation that we are having here on Hallyu mapping in context, in historical and global context. I really appreciate that. And I also, it raises a lot of important questions that I have been facing since I starting this mapping journey back in 2017. It takes a lot of gut. it takes a lot of courage to continue working on this experimental, highly experimental projects, on putting together new instruments for new methodologies when you are constantly being a subject of criticism, constantly. And I am totally okay with that. All you are here because I want these critical conversations to happen. I want to hear more critical feedback, but it takes a lot of courage to continue innovate and to continue experiment and to continue your vision with developing new tools. We are in a very slippery kind of moment where we hear a lot of criticism about data, about AI, about manipulation with data and things like that. For me, this mapping journey is trying to find a more integrative way for academic research, for inductive research, to rather build platforms to raise questions rather than to find final answers to their questions. So, and I hope with my next presentation of the launch of the map, I will convince you that I'm trying to do something that takes a lot of courage to do and that still has a lot of value. So even though, yes, we cannot escape creating narratives. Even any lecture or any library in itself is a narrative. It tells someone's agenda. It tells someone's history, background, and vision. So we cannot escape that. And my mapping also is a subject of, it's a media object that I create. Media object, any media object communicates particular ideas. There is some missing information there. There is something where we make a focus, so we cannot escape that. This is what we are doing. But I really believe that this is a methodology to exist and to develop, and it gives us a lot of new research opportunities in the future. So I'm really grateful for this historical introduction into how these tools have been developed to Professor Andrea Nanetti. Okay.
Exactly. So actually, he gave me a really fundamental foundation of what are you doing now. So yeah, it's really helpful, and then his insights very helpful for our project. So as
we will talk more.
Thank you so much. Please give him a big applause again. Thank you. All right. As Natalia mentioned, now let's move on to next session. Natalia will take the launch of the mapping application Hallyu Tracker, and then, as you know, she is a program leader, and then she is a fascinating scholar in terms of, I can say, the soft power field and the cultural diplomacy, international cultural relations, and also she gave lots of enormous work in this data to power. Please welcome Natalia.
Thank you so much, everyone, again, for being here and celebrating this moment with me, where we're finally presenting the final product of this research journey that we started a year ago. But for me, like I already mentioned, it's quite a long journey, experimenting a lot with the mapping methodologies. So today, I will come back to this question again and again: what is a Hallyu tracker? But before just playing with the demo that I would like to, with the visualization mapping application, I just wanted to say a few words about what is Hallyu tracker in terms of all the efforts that have been put together to bring it to your attention today. So it's a digital creative practice output of the research project, and it's also a result of a highly collaborative and highly interdisciplinary and international research work. So yes, so digital creative praxis. So I think, and I'm also grateful to Venka, the provost of LASALLE, who mentioned that what kind of research is being celebrated here is LASALLE, and this research is very much integrated into practice. So this is, and I have been looking for their, really important and favorable environment for me to thrive with my experimental research, which is so much integrated into reflexive praxis. And LaSalle gave me this opportunity because they have been funding my research very generously, and I'm grateful for that. So this is a little bit different research journey when you have a completely different research outputs, not necessarily just an article published or a book published, even though it doesn't exclude from my pursuits of academic knowledge. It's about creating something. It's about creating something in a group, with a group of people who are looking into new ways to experiment with things. So this project was also co-founded by the Equerry Foundation through their policy-oriented grant program. And as I already mentioned earlier, the whole aim of that was to introduce, to share new approaches into looking into Hallyu from completely different perspective, from more kind of data-driven approach. Because, like I already mentioned very briefly, we discovered a huge dataverse of all data exists going back to 1990s, and there was no way to look into this data to provide fresh perspective into Hallyu. So the whole idea of doing all this work is not just for the sake of mapping. It's the other way around. It's just to putting all this together into generate new insights and generate new knowledge, and to look if there is a way that to look at Hallyu from their angle that has never been captured yet. So I must say thank you to so many people who participated in this project. So first of all, the research team. Many of them will be presenting today, and it's really I'm blessed to meet all these people who embarked on this journey for me, and their presence on the project and their contribution in this project is invaluable also because they all come from various disciplines. It's a highly interdisciplinary environment that we created, and each of these disciplines contributed all these new insights how to look into the global phenomenon of Hallyu, which is so multi-layered and so complex. And I must say thank you to an army, a real army of research assistants that worked on the project. Josephine, she's with us today. She will be also presenting insights from this mapping project. So we've got a lot of help from graduate students, PhD students, master students who joined us and who were doing an excellent job in collecting a lot of data. Like I mentioned, it's around 500 data sets, 500 data sets that eventually we were able to map 300. It's a lot of work just to find, to collect, to aggregate them, and to put it on the map. So why Hallyu Tracker? So we were hoping to offer with this mapping tool, to offer a quick global snapshot of Hallyu presence, visibility, popularity around the world. And we wanted to identify and explore different trends and patterns that emerge of Hallyu spread and intensity across different time periods. So we wanted to explore to what extent different variables from various countries, and we are talking about different factors like economic, cultural, political, social demographic, how all these things shape Hallyu spread, reach, and engagement in different geolocations, because they create this particular context. They create either opportunities for Hallyu spread or different challenges. So, and the tool was designed with an idea that there should be some kind of a metric system for this phenomenon that was previously explored only through qualitative terms. And we have a lot of Hallyu researchers here who are focusing just strictly on Hallyu. And as they already mentioned, many of them have very, traditional qualitative approach in that. So qualitative research is not very doesn't really much accommodate for generalization of this knowledge, and it's very hard to compare the insights from the qualitative research across different geolocations if we take a much larger global scale. So with what I have developed, or I have designed, or tried to do so, my idea was to provide a new way to look at these things, and not necessarily, so it allows us to compare frameworks for different geolocations based on different Hallyu consumption potentials, capabilities for its circulation, and levels of their actual engagement. That's what we were doing. So a little bit of explanation what kind of data you will find on the map. So the application is already available online and accessible online. Anyone can go and play with it and explore, and there is tons of information and data to explore and to get from there. So, but basically, and I will show you later, there are three the most important pillars that differentiate the data on the map. So it's their mapping layers that are under the reach power cluster layer, appeal power, and engagement power. So the reach power is more about economic and social demographic context. We are looking in this mapping layers and the cluster of layers more on in terms of what kind of economic, social demographic opportunities exist in each particular country for a potential consumption of these creative industry products. We also look in this layer at the target experts, what is already happening or has been happening in the past several years. So potential and actual. So then we move to the appeal power cluster layers, and we are not we move away from economics. We go to the culture. We go to different cultural contexts and different cultural exposures that different from different populations in different countries and cities around the world have around Hallyu, and we are looking at potential appeal powers. And we're also looking again at the target efforts. So potential appeal, and finally, like what is currently being done either by the government or by the creative industries into targeting people from these particular countries. And there is a lot going on, both in the industry and in the government, how they target different societies. And finally, the engagement, the impact, what we are having. So it's more about the fandom and media resonance, to what extent this Hallyu affected the society. So we have economic, culture, and finally the social. So, and there is two types of data you will find here. On the one hand, positive Hallyu fandom, and on the other hand, Hallyu contra flows that emerge. And we will have this excellent presentation of Adjunct Kim, who will talk about anti-Hallyu movements. So we have all this data here. So, and with that, so when you a little bit understand right now how it works, let me go to the mapping application itself to very quickly, I know that not a lot of time, but very quickly to show you what we have here. So you are inside the application itself already. So on the left, you have this menu where you can go to, like I already explained, these different three clusters of layers, reach power, appeal power, and engagement power. Each cluster of layers contains at least 5 or 4 different layers, and we have done mapping on the country level and on the city level. So you will find also 14 cities that we selected very strategically, and we collected mapped data for these 14 cities. So once you go to any, so we are currently on this local reach power. So like I said, that maps the social, demographic, and economic context of countries in terms of to what extent each of this country could be, targeted for the actual consumption. So it is based on different types of, so each layer actually calculates an index. For example, so this index ranges from 0 to 100, and it is a sum of normalized variables. Like I said, a lot of data puts into that. For example, this local reach power is a result of sub-indexes such as audiences scope, where we are looking at the population itself, the median age, because Hallyu, as you remember, known as for very young demographics, right? So the median age is very important. We are looking at human development factors. We also look at consumption power. To what extent people in this country would be concerned to purchase cultural or creative industry products? Or are the economics not developed enough even to think about all these extras that exist on the global market? And we have this target trade power. So in what kind of position this country in the global trade? All these factors affect to a certain degree where Hallyu could travel in the end of the day, right? So we are looking at, so the intensity of the green color on the map indicates all these countries with a high index. So if we look at this map right now, so what we are seeing that the majority of the countries around the world, the developed world or the global south are highlighted in green because they have these very high indexes for potential reach of Hallyu. But we also have a lot of Asian countries, especially China is shining very brightly. So my observation is that around more than 50 countries around the world, 50 countries with a high index of potential Hallyu consumption, so which goes above 80. But if we go to the target power, target power, this is the geography of the current target power based on cultural imports and cultural exports. So what does this comparison of just two geographies tell us? So this is currently where the country is traveling through targeted cultural exports, right? And here is where it could travel, potentially. So the Korean government is prioritizing really a handful of countries where they put their efforts into bringing it here. Even though it's developing, I know it's developing. But there are many, many other areas around the world where it could potentially travel, which are remaining very virgin, very untapped areas. So, we can move now to the appeal power layer. And the appeal power layer, so I collected a lot of data trying to understand. Like we already started this just conversation with you saying why Korea is so popular around the world, why it targets so many people around the world. So I was looking into this question. This question really bothers me. I wanted to deconstruct to what extent we can really explore the appeal, the potential appeal, and if there is any data at all that could tell us to what extent Hallyu could be liked or disliked in particular society, right? So based on my research, I differentiated across three main appeal powers. So first is the national appeal power. So national appeal is basically about the Korean exposure, to what extent people from this country are exposed already to Korean culture through immigration, diaspora, tourism, foreign tourists traveling to Korea and things like that. To what extent they're culturally proximate to Korea. So and I used Hofstede model to measure cultural proximity in terms of all these different values that you see here: power, distance, individualism, collectivism, all these kind of things. I also looked into social proximity. So to what extent social norms, behavioral norms are similar, are different to Koreans, accepted in Korean society. And I also, it's for fun, dietary proximity. I looked at food consumption, to what extent people in different countries would be practicing similar food consumption habits or have similar preferences for food. So, and I mapped it all. And what we can see here, so a lot of scholars try to explain, for example, like the rise of Hallyu first in Asia with this cultural proximity, right? There is the historical, cultural context and philosophy, religion that unites all these Asian countries, and explain why Hallyu started to be very popular in Asia. So, but with my mapping, we can see that this proximity or national appeal, I call it national appeal, doesn't necessarily, translate to geographic proximity, because you can see, for example, a lot of European countries are shining very bright on the map, exhibiting based on just data. And why is it happening? Is because this international exchanges with Korea, exposure to Korean culture, and also so like a lot of things are really similar to according to this cultural proximity. So this is what we found out. So another appeal power that we looked at is a universal appeal. So Korea and many Korean idols really promote universal liberal values. So many of them are, in a direct collaboration with United Nations and UNICEF, promote this idea of democracy and freedom of expression and liberal ideas. So my idea was, okay, so we are talking right now about this transnational proximity, not, cultural proximity, but really transnational, universal values. So I tried to map the countries on their universal appeal, and I mapped normative liberalism into to what extent each of the country promotes this value of a universal liberalism. I looked at the global exposure, not the Korean exposure in this way, but the global exposure, how the country is positioned in these global discourses, to what extent it's open or closed to these global informational environments that actually change people's minds a lot. And finally, their local diversity, because the more the diverse the society, the more they would be open to any new ideas arriving, including the Korean way, including products that arrive in their country, not in their language and not in English at all, but in Korean, and completely different. So I looked in all this data and aggregated. You can see it's pretty a lot. So what we see the geography here. So again, it's not a surprising geography when we map on the global exposure. It's not a surprising geography when we look at normal liberalism, right? We can see all these European countries are shining up. We can see, not so many Asian countries anymore, Australia is in the Asia Pacific. So it's just the common geography that we already know. But what is interesting is that if we move right away to the Hallyu engagement, the geography would be very similar to what we see on the universal appeal. So if you look, for example, closer to Europe here, and we are Hallyu engagement, is the actual engagement that is happening with Hallyu. And we come back to universal appeal. It's very much similar. So there is no any answer here. It's just a research insight and an observation. There is a lot of to do in order to translate it into academic research outputs. But just an observation that would not be maybe so common to our eye before that. So let me go to the engagement layer. So we collected a lot of data. And also on the appeal power, we have this target appeal. So we actually mapped all the efforts of different countries around South Korea in terms of industries and governments, how they target different areas. Again, the geography is, like I already mentioned earlier, is a handful of countries would pop up a lot because they are targeting particular countries around the world, and not of them necessarily all those that there is a potential there, or those where we can see a lot of appeal going on. So on the engagement layer, we mapped data that includes, so this is so interesting because when we started this project, we had this idea, when we map actual engagement with Hallyu, right, we really need to understand like how many people are engaged, how many tickets are sold, so all this data, for matter of fact, is not available. Is not available because except from the government data. So, and again, you can make your own choice rather than you trust this data. It comes from the Korean government, but we mapped the data from the Korean government, yes. So again, it's a matter of like how much you trust this data. But the industries, no industry would be engaged in this project to share their own data and share like how many customers they have around the world. So because of that limitation, we actually came up with a whole framework how we look into this. And eventually, we were able to collect tons of data on Hallyu engagements in different countries, which includes, for example, the digital fandom. And we had the whole project where focused research on Facebook, where we trying to find what kind of Facebook fans groups exist in different countries around the world, collecting all the data on their fans. This is a lot of target effort on our side and a lot of research being done to collect and to put together all this data that now can be mapped. So we also looked at media resonance. So we worked, and I would like to thank Malar, the director of the library here, who provided this access to LexisNexis. LexisNexis is one of the largest database of media sources that contains all the media articles, and we are talking about millions of articles published by the main publishing companies, news media companies around the world. So we were able to work with this database and map, working with the search words for Hallyu and anti-Hallyu, a lot of data coming from media articles around us. That's amazing. So this is, I'm very grateful that we have such a support here at LaSalle for that research. So we also looked at Google Trends. So we eventually, like, okay, if not, how else we can, I see that this engagement is happening. So Google search is becoming a trusted method in academic research. There is a lot of papers were published using Google Trends. To what extent, for example, Hallyu or particular music groups, BTS, for example, are being searched in the country. What is really interesting, for example, even like China, right? China, Google is prohibited. All social media is prohibited. What we found out that even in China, Google Trends remained very active. So there was a lot of Google searches on Hallyu, and especially on particular groups like BTS. So it's never went down, even in the most severe anti-Hallyu movements in China and bans of Hallyu products in China. We also observed this important trend with China is that in certain years when when there was very strong anti-Hallyu movement promoted by the government, and people were maybe shy or intimidated to use their own social media, they would migrate to Facebook, they would migrate to Twitter, to X, to continue following their idols, which is very, very interesting. So something that I wanted to... Again, I'm coming back to this question, what is Hallyu tracker in the end of the day, right? And I just wanted to make these 3 points here. Talking about it as a new methodology for academic research, as a platform, potential platform for policy making and advocacy, and a tool for industry research as well. So I think these examples of Hallyu map that already was mentioned by Andrea and Nanetti, so that actually example inspired my whole research journey with that. Because what is important about this Hallyu map from 1849 is that the first time in history the map was used to generate new knowledge. Not to illustrate existing knowledge, but to generate new knowledge. Because Only when he was able to put all the data and correlate the data, on the one hand, of this epidemic of cholera, and on the other hand, the urban infrastructure, and when he put all these things together, only that he was able to find out the source for cholera, the source. So that mapping tool was a research tool. It was not just an illustration. That is the whole inspiration in my own research journey and project, because I want to look at what I am doing as a tool for discovery, and not a mere decoration for the resulting manuscript. It's not like that. It's a method to explore unknowns as opposed to communicate existing knowledge, knowns. It's a platform for intense data analysis to identify, like I already said, patterns or trends that help to pose, I hope, us important questions. And finally, it could be a tool for developing new theories based on relationships among various data sets in the context of their geotemporal changes and developments. This is what I'm doing here. Also, in terms of the policy making, like I already mentioned here, the project was funded by the Korea Foundation through policy-oriented research grant program. And this is not one of their, effort on the Korean government sides to develop similar data-driven projects around Hallyu and measuring and monitoring the Hallyu impacts around the world. So there is a Korean Foundation for Informational Cultural Exchanges that commissioned already 3 projects in the past, but 3 not very successful, working on this data-driven approaches and AI to explore how Hallyu could be, captured, or the Korea Culture Information Service Agencies that is working on its culture big data platform, aggregating data from 33 countries around the world. So what we are doing, I think, meeting the needs for I think this is on the agenda of any government around the world, to measure their resources, to understand and assess their outputs, and to explore their impacts. This is the metric measurement system that on the agenda of any government. So, and I think with what we are developing, even though for me is a research tool, could be easily transformed into this tool that would highlight all these different resources, outputs, and impacts. So it's also could be a demonstration tool for results to stakeholders and communicating activities and their implications, and also to formulate strategic decision for targeting efforts. Because with the mapping that I explained, it's very easy to highlight the areas where it's currently missing out. There is a lot of potential, but nothing is going on in these areas. So this could be a tool to strategically think about new verging areas where these efforts could be mapped. In terms of the industry research, also could be, there is a lot of things going on right now in South Korea. So Space Oddity is the startup with whom we are talked about and presented our mapping system. They are doing their own mapping. So, for example, you can see 2023 K-pop global map. So they're collecting a lot of social media data on their own to complement all these research efforts. So when we talked with them, what they said to us that really, exploring new markets for any industry is a very risky and time-consuming exercise. So, and it's really, for many industries, they don't have so much time, resources, and efforts to explore the country context in such a detail that we already presented to them in so easy way to access all this data. So, and they really appreciated that such tools now could be available, because it's really saves time, saves a lot of money, because you can get a very quick snapshot on what's going on and compare country profiles for dozens of economic, social, demographic, even political variables across geography and time periods, which is very important. And of course, it helps to spot emerging trends and identify untapped opportunities. So the future of Hallyu Tracker. So what the whole exercise of completing this project, I think is, again, I'm completing it right now with this. It's just the first step for me for moving forward in the journey, because there are so many new things that I understood just putting together so much data into one map. The first time in my life so far, because I've never mapped so much data. So currently we use the artificial intelligence to really overcome the data gaps. So because there is still a lot of data gaps exist, even we mapped a lot of data, and like I said, it's tons of data, but there are data gaps. And we used machine learning to help us to predict the data from the past, not looking into the future, but from the past, just based on the correlations and patterns and the algorithm that already exist in existing data. We use that. So, and it's very transparent. So if you play with their map, you will see some of the data is factual, that's real numbers, and some are predicted data, so which AI helped us to predict for this particular years if we had the missing data. Because without the data, the mapping itself and visualization wouldn't be possible at all. So, but I want to, in the future, to employ AI to find correlations among multiple data sets for predictive analytics. So to go beyond that to one level up, this is what is coming next. I also want AI to help me as a human being to analyze to what we already mapped, because and this came up already with some of the discussants to whom I presented this demo previously. So it's very, even right now, we created this tool for simplification, right? To make it easier to understand the data. But we mapped so much data and so much layers. And when you try, and with your human brain, you try to find yourself patterns or correlations, it's becoming a very impossible task to do. So we really need the help of AI to suggest us these correlations, to suggest us these patterns that emerge. And we as a human being, of course, need to check what's going on. But we need this tool because what could be done, if you just have one layered map, right? It's easy to find a correlation. Or you have just one timeline with data. It's easy to find a correlation. But when you multiply it all and you have 300, how you can, it's very, for a human brain, it's very difficult to grasp. And it's easy to do. I have already discussed with my IT outsource team. It's easy to do and it's coming, and I'm very excited about that. And so also what we learned through this project is sometimes mapping is a very powerful tool, especially when we talk about the global phenomenon of Hallyu, and we try to put everything on the global map. But sometimes map cannot, be so convincing if you want to present particular data. So what I also want to add to that is where we are able to create different bar charts, different other infographics out of that, constantly saying, okay, I'm looking at this, for example, 5 countries. I'm looking at this 20 variables. Create me a bar chart or a pie or whatever. So it could be visualized in a much better way. Because we also were commissioned by Frederick Newman Foundation from Seoul office. So they are doing a lot of cultural public diplomacy activities, and they were very much interested and commissioned a research based on that project. And we are writing a report for them right now, completing this report. And again, this issue came up very, significantly, that like sometimes maps are not enough to visualize something. We need more nuance, sometimes, visualizations to make it happen. And this is my big next step. Thank you for listening. And thank you. And we will continue the session.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much, Professor Grincheva. Now let's start the expert panel discussion. Can I invite Dr. Hedren and then Gerald, Professor Gerald? Yes. On our program, actually, we do have Professor Irene Wu, but unfortunately, she's not coming. So instead of Irene Wu, then we'll have Professor Natalia Grincheva. Yeah. Natalia, do you want to come here?
Yeah.
Yes. So let me introduce very briefly. First, Dr. Hedren Sam. He's a research fellow for Digital Humanities and Department of English and Linguistics and Theater Studies, National University of Singapore. And he's an interdisciplinary scholar. Thank you so much. Specializing in digital approach and ontology-based frameworks and knowledge organization systems. Welcome. And then Professor Gerald Shim. Oh, yeah, there you go. So he is a scholar, School of Communication and Multimedia Studies in the Florida Atlanta University in the United States. And he is the author of the fascinating book, Screening Big Data, Films That Shape Our Algorithmic Literacy. And then he is a leading scholar, digital media, culture and technology, and the politics of AI. And then, yeah, we have the video clip from Professor Irene Wu, because she was not able to join today. So could you please play the clip?
Hello, I'm Irene Wu. This is such a wonderful conference. I'm so sorry to miss it in person. I'm a political scientist and an economist, and I teach here in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University, and I also work at the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, although my remarks here reflect my own views only, and not those of the Commission, its members, or its staff. I just recently published a book called Measuring Soft Power in International Relations, where I use statistics on migration, international education, and travel to identify which countries attract the most interest from foreigners. So I have an interest in soft power, in cultural relations, and in different methods to describe and depict this kind of influence. And a couple weeks ago, I saw Dr. Grincheva's demonstration of the Hallyu global map. I'm so impressed with the volume of data that can be collected and displayed. It's a really innovative way to wrestle with large amounts of data and force them along lines of measurement, like by nation, within a nation, and over time. I'm sure there are many areas where there is original data, and I was particularly impressed that Dr. Grincheva's team was able to do things like uncover Hallyu fan groups on Facebook across so many countries. A map like this is especially useful for bringing together that kind of data. My main question would be is, what conclusions can we draw from a map so full of so many different kinds of data? Probably the answer is that we have to identify specific research questions that can be answered, and that would force us to focus on just specific parts of the map or just specific types of data. Maybe an intermediate step that might be useful is some kind of list of what types of data are in the map. Some of that might be easy, because it's drawn from other organizations' data collections. And some of it might be harder or maybe more interesting because it's the original data collected. And that's what really makes it great. Another way I see the map is useful is if you can use it to compare data on specific events or issues to national or global statistics. For example, if foreign visitors come to a big music concert, you might be able to see where they traveled from, and then you can compare that data to total visitors to that country, and then see if that concert attracted visitors from different places or from basically the same places. Also, I think this kind of map can be useful for cultural institutions who are interested in understanding their global reach. This kind of map can be useful to store the data and display it easily. For example, if they have a particular program and visitors from these countries came, they can see that, or if they have an online engagement, what were the responses for different countries. So thank you for the opportunity to make this intervention. I'm sure it's going to be a good discussion.
Okay, great. So shall we just collect all the feedback after that? I think that's better. So can I ask you feedback about her excellent feedback and the successful launch of the Hallyu tracker? So could you please give us your thoughts or any main takeaways?
First of all, I want to thank Natalia and Joe for the generous invitation to say something, to deliver some comments here. Fully aware that I'm one of the last obstacles between you and lunch. I'll keep it short, okay? So the visual graphic, if you actually have a chance to kind of launch the tracker, the visual graphic that launches it is this kind of swift glide like towards Earth, right? This interplanetary drift, and you know, for the kid in me, it kind of evoked the movement or the shot right after the opening credits of Superman in 1978. But for someone who's being asked to say something more profound, that perspectival movement of partly a track, partly a zoom, kind of reminded me of the epigraph from anthropologist Del Hymes that opens Lev Manovich's 2020 book, Cultural Analytics. More specifically, the movement kind of mimics the optical transformation of scientific instruments cited by Hymes in his book, The Use of Computers in Anthropology. In that passage, like in that epigraph, with regards to the impact of the computer on social sciences, Hymes wrote, and I quote, "Some of the impact of the computer has to do simply with willingness to take advantage of the opportunity or predisposition through already extensive use of processes, especially statistically facilitated by the computer. More perhaps has to do with what a computer, in a sense like a telescope or a microscope, can enable us to see." As a sort of kind of self-indulgent aside, I want to say that the visual template of the globe and the Mercator map projections used here, not here, but used in the tracker, right, is a nod perhaps to Natalia's current home base. But you know, I say that because in my second book, Post-Colonial Hang-Ups in Southeast Asian Cinema, I argue that Singapore has an intensely cartographic imagination, due in large part to the geopolitical conditions of its identity and development. But getting back on point, that flight towards Earth in the launching graphic underlines the optical metaphor within Delheim's riff a half a century ago. Except, as Bruno Latour reminds us in his essay Anti-Zoom, compared to either the telescope or the microscope, the computer is far less of an instrument that magnifies, that might bring a perspective closer to either some empirical or positive truth. Rather, there's an epistemological break with the computer, right? It relies on data brought into the world through a body of knowledge regimes and assumptions, as several people have pointed out today. That is to say, data is always interpreted, or if you prefer Jeffrey Bowker's famous proclamation that raw data is an oxymoron. In addition, right, Manovich uses Hymes to tout the computer as the only instrument able to accommodate the massiveness of contemporary data sets. These are data sets generated by the scale of digital culture, numerical scale, geopolitical scale, and social scale. Indeed, as the team behind the Hallyu tracker state, right, Hallyu today has a, quote, spread, reach, and influence enabled, end quote, enabled by computers and platforms. These computers and platforms facilitate its consumption. They enable fans to buy tickets, stream performances or recordings, and to react and engage with Hallyu. Cultural analytics for Manovich, right, is the computational analysis of cultural data sets. It's a mix of computer science, statistics, data viz, and digital art. For Manovich, its primary benefits are the ability to fashion a more inclusive and democratic understanding of the cultural present and also of cultural histories. Secondly, its second benefit is the capacity to chart those observations over time. And here's kind of the irony of it, right? To do so perpetually requires new data sets. And the best source of new data sets are inevitably large commercial platforms with the ability to carry out real-time analytics. I'm talking about, I think a speaker earlier today talked about BTS's 75 million followers on Instagram, or we can refer to Netflix's almost 300 million subscribers worldwide. These platforms are the holders of potentially the deepest insights into the intimacies of cultural experience, which I think is at the heart of the tracker, right? What it really wants to get at. And I think what Natalia has wanted to get at for a long time. So on the one hand, we probably should be open to industry partnerships. I think there's a natural sort of resistance to that, but we should be open to that, I think, right? To industry partnerships and collaborations. On the other hand, inclusivity and democratic values are incongruent with these companies, as some recent political events have brought into sharp relief. We're in the 1 month anniversary of the US election. Anyway, now these are inherent contradictions that make projects such as these, I think, well poised to proceed with a kind of self-reflexive awareness, right, of its potentials and drawbacks, and of their own underlying methods and technology. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Shall we move to Dr. Song?
Yeah. Okay, I think. Hello. Hi, thank you. I mean, thanks for the opportunity for being here, and congratulations for the wonderful tool being launched. So I think today we have a very heavy morning. There's been a lot of great points, being brought up by earlier speakers and also by Gerald and also by Irene. I think I would want to, try to minimize overlapping points. So this is a challenge of me being the last person to provide some kind of feedback right to the tool. I think one of the things that I get from playing around the tool and also from a reflection from earlier discussion is that, I mean, the purpose, and motivation of data visualization, right, is actually to make data critical. Right, and I think this is actually extremely important, right? It's not just about presenting data, right? It's not just about presenting insights, right? But it becomes an essential tool for us to navigate complexities, right? To allow us to uncover the hidden dynamics within data, right? To highlight patterns, right? And to highlight representations, right? So I think one of the important thing about the tracker is that, I also do resonate with the idea of zooming into the Earth at the very beginning of the when you enter the tomb, right? It's like the whole world of Hallyu being visualized in the world itself, right? And not only that, you give a very good holistic kind of view, right? And allow you to view to various countries, cities, regions, right? To make sense about certain situations, right? And I think this is what we're referring to being having visualization as playing the role of making data critical. And on top of that, I mean, it's just to reflect a little bit on what Prof. Quote and earlier some earlier presentation is that our world right now is much more complex, right? So societies are much more complex as compared to, say, 50 years ago, right? Our problems that we deal with is much more complex, right? Today, if you were to launch a piece of music, it becomes a hit in minutes, right? Just like apati, right? Right? So, I mean, for me, I do not have a playlist on a Korean playlist on Spotify. But I cannot ignore that we are in the Korean wave, right? My niece and nephew listen to Korean music, right? My mom watch Korean dramas. every morning, every Saturday morning, I hear Korean music being played downstairs as the elderly do their exercises, right? I traveled to Taiwan and Malaysia in past month, and when I was walking on the street, I hear Korean music being played as well, right? Right. So we it's not a question of whether are we affiliated with the Korean wave. No, it's that we are in the Korean wave, and I think this brings in the importance of such a tracker like this, right? So I think I also want to bring a few points whereby, honestly speaking, the tracker brings in more questions than answers, which is in a good way, right? I think to echo what Irene and some of the speakers actually, and Natalia actually mentioned, right? It allows us to derive our own narratives, right? Our own conclusions, and more importantly is that it actually encourage or inspire new lines of inquiry, right? So, I mean, for example, like when I was playing around with the platform, some of the questions comes up. I mean, of course, I play it in a very preliminary way, right? Like what drive the cultural resonance, beyond language and cultural proximity. Because when I was playing around with the platform, I realized that cultural proximity is actually not a true key factor to influence appeal. Irregardless of whether it's low or high, the appeal can remain high. Another observation that I have is that the consumption power, seems to be closely related to reach. In other words, if a country, a city have or people can have able to spend more, right? There's a higher tendency whereby the influence will be higher, the reach will be higher, right? So it also allows me to dive into further questions like, how do digital platforms, right, mediate the global reach of Hallyu, right? And how localization, on the other hand, contribute to the spread of the Korean wave, right? And another thing I also like about the platform is that it covers both sides. So one, of course, you look into the reach and the influence of the Korean wave. And another thing is that we also look into the anti-Hallyu movements, right? On the opposite direction, right? And I think it's very important to have a platform to portray both, the data from both angles, right? Only then, one, of course, we are able to find a common ground, right? And only then we can find and delve in deeper into what exactly really affects the influence of the Korean wave. Okay, so I think I want to end by by highlighting some of the broad implications for cultural research using such a tool, right? I think one of the two is pretty obvious to me is that it moves beyond just anecdotal or isolated observations, right? But offering a more a holistic, comprehensive, evidence-based framework to analyze cultural movements. My second point is that it also highlights the interconnectedness of culture, economy, technology, policy, right? Paving the way for further interdisciplinary collaborations. And more important thing is that it democratizes cultural analysis and making data-driven insights pretty much accessible to scholars, right, to policymakers, or even the public. Yeah, thank you.
Right, thank you. It's really constructive feedback. Can you get back to you, Natalia?
I think indeed we have lunch coming
Yeah.
up. So why don't we collect more questions from the audiences to contribute to this discussion? Any critical points or anything you want to mention that is important, and then we will move all to have lunch and we will discuss it more over the lunch. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
I just have a quick question. Yeah, congratulations. Quite an undertaking. I just want to riff off of Gerard, what you just said. I thought that was very good to end on what the tool is actually for. My question is on products. What does the tool include the presence of Korean products in countries? That means exports. And what I'm getting at is, I think one of the questions is, once you get through all the trends, there's probably a nagging question about what is disturbing about a trend. You can say all day long things are very fast, but a lot of times things are very subtle and very, very slow. And so I'm thinking of things like Korean skincare products and Korean IT products and electronics. So these are all products, right? So does your tool cover products into export into these countries? Because the skincare part is really interesting because I know of a PhD student at NUS who is studying about the kind of our preoccupation with white skin. And, in an age of decolonizing, nobody should be talking like that. But the Korean products and the Japanese products is all about looking whiter, and men looking like women, plastic surgery and all. So that is kind of funny and cute, and it's great in Korean dramas, but at some point you start to think, wait, what's going on here? Right? Same thing with IT products. Does it cover IT products? The penetration of Samsung phones and Samsung white goods and brown goods in countries outside of Korea. How is that changing the way we look at homes and how we run homes? Does it cover products?
Thank you. Fascinating feedback. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
Hi. I have a question regarding like the map. I was playing around with it, and I was very interested how Korea was represented in this map. And I played around and I was like very surprised to see things like the appeal of K-pop, the cultural reach of K-pop, and also anti-Hallyu represented in Korea on the map. So I'm wondering, like what does Korea represent here on this map, mapping Hallyu? Like what does it do? So like I want to just open that question.
Okay, very good. And please, if you want. Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating map. I have a question. Is there a possibility to see, for example, and just the vectors of reception, if that makes sense? Because, for example, it goes from Korea to the United States, and then the United States, because everybody sees Americans like BTS, so maybe there's something about it. That's interesting to me because that's something that is kind of relevant to other disciplines where, like, for example, I'm from the legal discipline, which might seem completely distinct, but the question of reception of law is a big one, and like how do these things kind of influence each other on a sort of greater scale? Thank you.
Thank you, great. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
Thank you so much for this illuminating presentation and findings. I just want to think more about the potentiality of this project because it sounds to me it's more like a modular project. Many other countries might want to actually adapt this to see and read the trends globally. And in this sense, I was thinking also, especially given that K-wave is so visible through social media platforms, and those are the people where the content creators and they are the leading creative economy leaders for the future as well. And according to recent statistics, up to 2029, annual growth rate of influencer marketing growth will be up to over 30% a year, which is quite significant. So I want to know how could we integrate more of those social media data, although you already did by using Facebook, but I know there's different regulating regimes nationwide and the company-wise. So there's a lot of hurdles. But still, we could think about how to integrate data, floating, real-time, changing data into this kind of mapping system. And also think with OpenStreetMap systems to make it more open to the public so people who are capable of doing it can join forces and improve this kind of system and to make it more transparent and accountable as well. So I just wanted to throw out some of those possibilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If you have any additional comments or questions, you can use lunchtime. Is that okay with you? Then let me get back to Natalia and then close this session.